Hello, everyone, again. Now it is time for our first keynote speaker. Mr. Carlo Ratti is with us to give his speech. Before giving this speech to him, I firstly would like to share his short bio with you all. Carlo Ratti is an architect and engineer by training. Professor Ratti teaches at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he directs the Senseable City Lab, and is a founding partner of the International Design and Innovation Office, Carlo Ratti Associati. He graduated from the Politecnico di Torino and the École Nationale de Pont et Chaussées in Paris, and later earned his MPhil and PhD at the University of Cambridge, UK. Carlo Ratti has been featured in Esquire magazine's Best and Brightest list, and the Thames and Hudson's selection of 60 innovators shaping our creative future. Blueprint magazine included him as one of the 25 people who will change the world of design. Forbes listed him as one of the names you need to know, and Fast Company named him as one of the 50 most influential designers in America. He was also featured in Wired magazine's Smart List 50 People Who Will Change the World. 3 of his projects, the Digital Water Pavilion, the Copenhagen Wheel and Scribit, have been included by Time magazine in the list of the best innovations of the year. Professor Ratti, we would like to kindly invite you for your speech if you're ready.
Yes. Yes, I'm ready, and good morning, good morning, everybody. So I will start sharing my screen. Oh, I get a message that there's no screen sharing has been disabled.
You couldn't see the screen share?
Yeah, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think, you know, you probably need to allow me to share the screen. Yeah.
Okay, I will. Okay, just give me a little.
Oh, now it works. I think, you know, you gave me permission. So, all right, let's let me share here. So I thought what we can talk about today, you know, in the next 40 minutes or so is about, well, I call it Sensible Cities. Sensible is the name of our lab at MIT. It's kind of a play on sensible and being able to sense, which is, you know, what is happening to cities and buildings today. But I kind of gave a subtitle on towards integration in natural and artificial, which I think is one of the key challenges we all face in architecture, planning, engineering, and so on. But first of all, just let's start with a few numbers about cities. You know, here you see an aerial view of New York. And if you need to remember some numbers about cities in general on the planet, remember the following: 2, 55, 75, and 80. These are only 2% of the surface of the planet, but at 55%, around 55% of the population, around 75% of energy consumption, around 80% of CO2 emissions. So if we can do something to make our cities a little bit more sustainable, that could be a big deal globally. And today we got a very interesting opportunity. Is what you see in this image here. This image is also the logo of our lab at MIT. But what it shows the world of data at the top, the physical world at the bottom, and really the convergence between the two. One way to say this is that internet is becoming Internet of Things, is merging with the physical world. And so it's changing the way we can understand, design, and ultimately live in our cities. And one of the key components of this, by the way, is data on the one hand. You know, data is what allows a better understanding of the city, and intelligence, especially artificial intelligence. You know, there's no artificial intelligence unless you've got data. So the two are connected and are increasingly providing a blending between the world of data, the world of digital, and the physical world. And that's what we're passionate about. We do it, first of all, at MIT, at Sensible City Lab in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then globally. We do it with our design office in New York, in Turin, London. We do it with some of the startups that came out of both recently. So when you look at the relationship between the natural and the artificial world, and what I mean by that is, you know, by the way, if you're interested in looking at this more philosophically, there's a beautiful book by Herbert Simon. It's called The Sciences of the Artificial. But, you know, the artificial is about our cities. It's about our buildings, about objects, the things we make. In the natural world, you know, more or less, we all know what it is. If you look at this, we can actually go from the artificial to natural, vice versa. So let's start looking about how to go from the artificial to the natural. So how we can start from the artificial world of, say, a city, and blend it more with the natural world, thanks again to sensors, intelligence, and data. For instance, here you see Lisbon, the city of Lisbon, mapped using billions of data points collected from the mobility network of the city. And you see that the city, which is part of the artificial world, becomes like a living organism. This visualization, by the way, was done by Pedro Cruz, who was in our lab at MIT, now is a professor at Northeastern University. He was at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and really shows you, again, how data can take part of the artificial, but this helps us to start interpreting and describe it as a living thing. Or this applies to buildings. This is a building we designed in Italy. Is the headquarters of the Agnelli Foundation. The Agnelli family, the Agnelli Foundation is behind one of the largest European conglomerates, spanning all the way from automotive to publishing. And here we did a building where, thanks again to data and sensors, the building responds dynamically to conditions inside. So heating, lighting, and cooling respond to the presence of people. If there's not people, fewer people, the building shuts down, in quotes. And then, you know, everybody can have their own preferences in order to look at their condition. And here is some of the reviews that the building got. And this applies, you know, both to the parts of the building I showed you before, the more modern one, but also the more historical one. This is the beautiful historical staircase, and that really has the same approach as you see here. Or another project I wanted to share with you is a project we we presented at the World Expo in Zaragoza, Spain. This was an expo. You know, the World Expo is the big international exhibition. The expo in this case was dedicated to water. Water was a common theme of the whole exhibition. And in this case, we started thinking about what about creating an architecture made of water. So the first idea, for instance, what you see here, was to create this kind of living water wall. And, you know, every dot is controlled, every droplet is controlled digitally. And then you can create like a wall that becomes like a responsive living wall. You approach it and it opens up to let you jump through, as you see there. And, you know, and you can use it as a display, almost as a display, but again, made with physical material with water. Now, when we presented this to the expo and to the mayor of the city, he liked it very much. So he commissioned us to build a pavilion at the entrance of the World Expo. The pavilion was called Digital Water Pavilion. Here you see, oh, actually, let me reshare by sharing also sound, because I don't think the sound was shared before because of the small issue we had. So you can hear also the sound, just a moment. So share. Yes. Now you should be able to hear the sound as well. I'm playing it again. We got Digital Water Pavilion. And here you see the whole building is made of water. No doors or windows, so when you approach it, it opens up to let you in. You go inside, all the walls expand and shrink based on, you know, how many people you have, or how you want to configure it. The roof is also covered with a thin layer of water. And if you got too much wind, you can lower the roof and you may splash in, or at the end of the day, you can actually close the building and the whole architecture disappears. Hopefully without other people there. There's sensors for that as well. Well, this was quite an old project, but you know, it was built for the expo, was the entry point of the expo. Next week in the video, you saw a bridge in the previous video. You know, that's a Zaha Hadid bridge to cross to the other side. The expo site was divided between one side and the other side, and with the river in the middle. But this was a building before the opening. I like this picture because you see the person here to the left was there with a trolley. The railway station, a beautiful new railway station by Carlos Ferrater, is next door. And but this person lost the train just because was there looking at it and say couldn't figure out, what the hell was happening with the building. Here it was myself testing actually the opening of the water walls, so how the walls would open and close to allow people in. Here you can see the opening, the opening night with actually both the physical pixels made of water that you see there, but also digital pixels, projections on the top of water. So the combination of both, one on the top of the other. And I should tell you now what happened one night when all of the sensors stopped working. When we build things that are in between the natural and the artificial, sometimes there's big surprises. So one night all of the sensors stopped working, and that night we were terrified because we didn't know what would happen then. But actually that night was a really great, fun night. That night people started engaging with the building in a different way. And it was not anymore a building that would open up when you approach it, but a building where you had to engage like this. And again, as I was saying, when you work at this boundary between the natural and the artificial, you always often have also this kind of unexpected behavior. Now, I wanted to show you another project where, again, still using about data intelligence to turn something that traditionally is just a part of the artificial world into something more alive. This is a project called Robot in Amsterdam. This was done not by our design office like the previous project. This was done at MIT. And we started working on Amsterdam a few years ago, and we got a collaboration between MIT, TU Delft, and Wageningen University, is what is called the AMS Institute in Amsterdam. And initially, we started looking at mobility, and the mayor was very interested in autonomous cars. Autonomous cars are the talk of the town these days all over the world. This was true also 5 years ago, and so initially we started thinking about experimenting with self-driving cars. But then when you look at Amsterdam, it's an old map. What you see is a beautiful city where most of the city center is actually not roads, but canals. It's not asphalt, but water. So we started thinking, water, those canals, especially in the past, were the main way to move things around Amsterdam. So why not to start from that and think not about autonomous or self-driving cars, but autonomous boats. We call them rowboat. This was the first kind of sketch we did. And the idea was if we could use the robot to move things around, like, this happens today, to move people around, to monitor air quality, water quality, as a moving platform, but also as a kind of dynamic architecture. So if you needed a bridge, you could assemble these little things, call them like floating pixels. You could come together and create like a temporary bridge. If you need to connect two sides of a canal, if you need to respond to an emergency, you can also have a floating platform. So using this as a way to create a responsive architecture, floating architecture for the city. Think about something like, walking city by Archigram, but here done as a floating city, that again assembles and disassembles continuously. And by the way, this is not something very new. If you look at Venice, the beautiful city of Venice, has been doing this for a long time. These are gondolas coming together, creating a temporary bridge between two sides of the city. And again, this is the same idea, but just done in a more traditional way, which incidentally, I think is one of the beautiful things of technology. Many times technology is not about developing new needs or doing new things. It's about doing old things, but doing them in a different or better way. Incidentally, this was mentioned in a beautiful way by Paul Valéry, the French writer, about where he says, what I want from modern life, modern technologies, to lead a non-modern life, but in a different way. I'll show you very briefly how we got to the robot. We started with a little model. This was a small model, 1 to 4. We looked at different ways to control movement with different type of engines. Here you see this. We tested water jets. Here was again the little small one. As we all know, these days, very easy to prototype. 3D printers and so on, something that in the past would take you a long time, you can prototype very quickly. You see here in the canals a few years ago, the first test is symmetrical. It can move, both ways. You can also move laterally Here. You see it go laterally, as I was saying a moment ago. And by the way, you know, apart from the research, people seem to be having a huge amount of fun playing with this on the canals, almost like a little toy. Well, in order to do this, in order to turn it into something real, however, you need to do many things, again, related to data and intelligence. One of the first things we had to do was map in real time all of the boats in the canals. This is information that normally on a street, on a road, you find just by opening a Google map, you got this information, but actually here, you know, again, you want to understand better what is going on in the traffic on the canals. So you want to map it, analyze it, and visualize it. And this is actually then looking at the eyes of the robot, how the robot collects 300,000 data points every second, and how a robot sees the city. This is kind of LiDAR sensor. So it's almost like a human eye. It's a silicon eye that actually does the same thing the human eye does, which is create a three-dimensional view of the city in order to navigate it. And then when you got that information, you can train the system. And you also here is a system that uses that information to avoid obstacles. So you see a small test in the MIT swimming pool. That's you know, what engineers use swimming pools for, and you know, testing every type of obstacles, even very complex one. This is Wei, one of our postdocs. And you see that the systems looks at the environment with LiDAR, as we saw before, and avoids the obstacles, as we see here. And this is actually where we stand.
This is Lucy. Lucy is a rowboat, a fully autonomous, zero-emission boat that operates on urban waterways, and she can change the way cities work. As congestion and emissions continue to rise, while cities continue to grow, the existing infrastructure of many cities struggles to keep up. Rowboats offer a solution by moving road traffic to the water. By bringing passengers from A to B, or as an on-demand boat, taking you anywhere you want. And they can also help the city as a multi-purpose workboat. Take Crystal. She is equipped to collect household waste to free the streets from heavy garbage trucks. Rowboats are fully autonomous, so they navigate without a skipper and can operate 24/7. In order to sail by themselves, rowboats need to perceive their environment and recognize objects such as bridge pillars, floating objects, and of course, other vessels. The primary source of information comes from a LiDAR sensor, but rowboats are also equipped with cameras, GPS, and a digital compass. Rowboat's onboard computer combines and processes all of the data and runs the rowboat software so it can successfully complete its mission plan. After 5 years of development, testing and experimentation, we have now successfully enabled autonomy on the full-scale prototypes. Rowboat is ready for the next step. Join us and let's unlock the potential of urban waterways together.
So as I said, you know, this was what we've seen so far, is starting from the artificial world, the world of objects, of buildings, of cities, and trying to make it work in a living, responsive way, similar to the natural world, and doing that through sensors, intelligence, and so on. But as I was saying in the beginning, there's also another way to look at this, is actually how you got the other way around, not from the artificial to the natural, but from the natural to the artificial. So I can use nature itself as an integral part of what we are building. You know, and by the way, this is nothing new. If you look at this, I think all of you, or many of you know what this is. Broadacre City, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in the 20th century. And if you look at this, you know, you see again that this thinking about integrating nature with the city was key part of the sketch. At the same time, we all know that, this was a nice utopic vision actually led to something different. Led to something that looks more like this kind of endless suburbia that we see around our cities, especially in the United States. And so I think the challenge this century is different. It's not to do what happened in the 20th century, having the city expand and merge with nature, but ultimately destroy it. But the opposite, to bring more nature closer to us in the center of our cities. It is something we'll be working a lot. So again, it's starting from the natural and bringing it closer to the artificial. For instance, this is a project in the center of Milan. It's a Trussardi fashion house. This is Piazza della Scala. La Scala Theater is next door. And here was the first project in Italy by Patrick Blanc, who developed this beautiful way to grow plants vertically. You might have seen some of his other projects in collaboration with many architects. And that, that becomes like a beautiful green oasis in the center of Milan, where you can actually have a place for meeting, for eating, for working, and for all of that. And also, again, you bring back nature in a place. Here, they traditionally had very little nature. It was really just mostly made of stones and so on. This is one of the biggest projects in Milan in terms of redevelopment. It's called Milan Innovation District, again, where nature again becomes a key part of the former World Expo site from 2015. We won the master plan with Land Lease, and it becomes this kind of long linear park that ties all the development. Well, this is a project we just finished very recently in Singapore. Has been winning quite a few prizes. It's one of the tallest buildings in Singapore called Capita Spring. In the spring, from the name, is actually the green element in the middle, which is like a beautiful suspended tropical forest overlooking the city, where people can go, can meet, can work, can enjoy free space. And it's about meeting with other people, and people meeting with nature, as you see here. And here you see the building actually as it is today, with the trees growing very, very fast, actually, and the facade opening up to let nature take over. Or this one, it's another project in Milan. It's a recent competition we won together with PLP Architects from the UK and DSR. DSR is Diller, Scafidi, and Renfro. So Liz Diller was involved in this project. Liz, as you might know, one of the key person behind the High Line in New York. This one suspended park in New York that changed the city over the past 20 years. And what you see here is actually a similar approach where nature, first of all, this was an old rail yard that cut the city into two parts. And so we reconnected them, both with a park, north to south, but also east to west with this kind of long suspended park that actually ties and connects the city. And actually next to that building, next to that master plan that we wanted would be actually open in 2026 as the Olympic Village of Milan. Milan will have the Olympics in 2026, the Winter Olympics in 2026. Next to it, there's a building by Covivio. Covivio is a major developer in Europe, where we designed this building just next door. And this, again, in this case, nature is blended both in the facade, but also becomes a long ramp that goes to the roof of the building, again, so that every floor will have access to outdoors, to green. It also will be a way to bring people together. The ramp is accessible to a broader public. It's not just private green for individuals. Or finally, some projects we've been working on in South America. This is the first major extension of Brasilia, the master plan of Brazilian. Brasilia, as you know, is beautiful. The historic master plan is a World Heritage Site. It looks beautiful when you're landing. It looks like, you see like an airplane. That was the image that Oscar Niemeyer and Lucio Costa had, this kind of airplane with spread wings, landing in the middle of the Cerrado. The Cerrado is this kind of savanna-like place in the middle of Brazil. And this was, when you see there to the right, was one of the first major extension of the original master plan. We took the same structure of the original master plan. But again, the master plan at the beginning was planned in a modernist way, mostly around the automobile and about monofunctional districts. And we try to use the same geometry, but break it up. And, try to have something where, again, it's more planned around pedestrians, about humans, and about nature. So you see some of the new places that follow the same proportions, but actually create a very different type of environment in the middle of Brasilia, as you see here. There are some of the views inside. Or somehow, I don't want to bother you too much, but also this applies also to historic city. That's our master plan for Guadalajara, for the digital creative city in Guadalajara, again, where the elements I was talking about become central, again, for an innovation district. Guadalajara is called the Mexican Silicon Valley, and a lot of this is at the core of the thinking, as you are seeing here. So again, I want to start wrapping up because we only have 5 or 10 minutes left. But basically, we looked at how to go from the natural to the artificial to the natural. But the reality, and by the way, think about this, that today, unfortunately, these two worlds are very different. On the one hand, you got people working in what they call, smart city and so on, thinking about how to go from the artificial to the natural, but it means about sensors, intelligence. That's one world. And then you got people working with nature, but there are two different communities in design that don't intersect much. I would argue that actually we're doing the same thing. It's about this kind of blending, which is very, very necessary today. We need to start to work with nature, not against nature. And so we need to blend more and more and blend, by combining. As I was saying, I kind of showed you the project so far in a simplified way, going left to right or right to left. But the reality is most projects combine both aspects. And so I wanted to share with you, for instance, one project where we combine both aspects. Is one of the largest decarbonization projects, urban decarbonization projects in the world today. It's called Helsinki Energy Challenge. It's a challenge that the city of Helsinki launched 2.5 years ago. City of Helsinki was quite brave because decided, instead of running a standard competition, to really do something more similar to what in the US is done by the X Prize Foundation. So to basically put a prize in the middle, the X Prize Foundation was by putting a prize in the middle, $10 million usually, and allow people to compete from all over the world to find innovative solutions. So the city did something similar in order to solve a very important problem in Helsinki. In Helsinki, there's a good news and bad news. The good news is actually that the whole city is heated using district heating. By the way, as you might imagine, heating is the main necessity in terms of energy for the city because of the cold climate. And district heating is usually very good. It means that you have a power plant, you produce power, and at the same time you got water as a byproduct, and you run the water through the city to heat it. So usually district heating is very good, very sustainable. At the same time, power production, and that's bad news, power production in Helsinki still uses a lot of coal. And coal, as we all know, is very polluting. So the question was, how can we think about district heating, but in a new world with where we hopefully will use only renewables? And there were around 250 participants with big companies, with multinational, competing globally. Our team was one of the winners. When I say our team, it was run by our design office in New York with many engineers, Rumble, broad spectrum engineers, a very specialized engineer, then Transolar, focusing on climate engineering, SBP, focusing on lightweight structures. Big multinational as well in our team. We brought on board Danfoss, a Danish multinational dealing a lot with heating, cooling, and so on. Schneider Electric, based initially originally from France, but again working a lot with both digitization, controls, electrification, and clearly a lot of these controls in terms of heating and cooling. Also financial companies such as OP or communication companies such as Quint Opera. I'll show you now a little video of our proposal. We're excited to present to you the Hot Heart, an innovative solution to decarbonize Helsinki. Here is how we'll do it. And I'll, you know, I think we gotten it at the end of our allocated time, but I think I'll stop it here. You know, let's keep in touch via social. But the point I want to say, in the last project you saw, there's the two components: a component of AI, artificial intelligence, data to run the system, but also a component of nature, blending again natural and artificial, blending the ecosystem, in this case the ecosystem of the Bay of Helsinki, with actually the system in order to heat the city. So in a nutshell, what I really want to share with you is how we really need to start thinking about what we design as something as part of nature, systems that behave more and more in a way similar to biological systems, so we can find in the future a better alliance. Somehow call it a coevolution between the natural and the artificial world. Thank you.
Professor Ratti, thank you so much for the speech. It was so inspiring and fruitful. So I guess we have almost 10 minutes for questions and answers. If you have any questions, all attendees, please let us know from the bar in the chat. You can write your questions and I can direct them.
Yeah. Any thoughts or ideas? Again,
yes.
I want to leave a bit of time for interaction. So at the end, so that it will not only be myself speaking, but also I'd like to hear from you. Yeah.
While waiting, maybe I can tell that it was so inspiring to see too many different scales together. In all projects, there are too many different scales, various actors, various authorities. So it might be challenging to maybe conduct all this process, but I'm sure it's so beneficial at the end. And I really would like to hear what's your motivation and what's your solution to that kind of creative and crowded teams.
Yeah, I think, you know, thank you for making this point. I think the point of scale is a very important point. And by the way, if you look at nature, nature is usually self-similar across different scales. So applies similar, not only similar principles and similar rules, but also similar approaches to the different scales. And that's why I think, you know, that then it becomes more important than ever for architecture and planning and engineering to think in the same way. You know, there was a famous sentence that belongs to the Bauhaus time. It actually was one of the people who was very connected to the Bauhaus, but then brought a lot of the Bauhaus teaching to Italy, was Ernesto Nathan Rogers, who actually said architecture should design everything from the spoon to the city. Well, I think that applies today, maybe even more than the spoon to the city, is from the microchip to the planet, looking at all scales. So you're right. And again, I think that if you want to look at this integration, natural and artificial, it's not a matter of scale, because things are usually self-similar. And everything also has to engage in a multiplicity of scale. If you look at the microchip, you need to also look at the impact of the microchip all the way to the city. Microchip, I mean a sensor or something. So that's a very important point, and I think it changes the traditional way that architects do things. When, you know, some people just focus whatever on the urban scale, some people focus on the building scale, some people even in buildings, you know, there's some people who focus on the big buildings or, you know, big developments or the smaller one. So really, I think that's important. And to finish, the last thing you hinted at in your question is about we also need new training in order to do it. We need training, because it means not only new training to be able to work across different scales, but new training in order to bring new disciplines to be able to, again, to blend you know, architecture, planning, engineering together with data, computer science, artificial intelligence, and all of that. So if you really are serious about this integration, again, we need to not to focus on scale, to focus across scales, but also have all the tools at our disposal with the different people around the table to achieve that. That was a very good point to hear. So thank you for your answer. And we have a wish from our professor Aslı Beşken. She thanks for your presentation. And we have a question from Tanya Usomarso. Have you gauged or measured the response from users of this project? Yes, we like very much to look at the response from users. Actually, in again, that is, if you because we're looking at this in this kind of evolutionary way, I think the response for a user is a little bit like what happens in nature with feedback loops. Now you can think about the design as a mutation in the artificial, and you see how that mutation interacts with the environment starting from the users. And we try to do it all the time. We like it because it's a good way to let the project evolve. Just a couple of thoughts I wanted to share. The first one is we actually were the urban curators for a big biennale last year in Kosovo, in Pristina, the capital of Kosovo. It's Manifesta. Manifesta is the largest, the leading nomadic biennale in Europe, our biennale. But since a few years, Manifesta started also engaging with cities and having an urban studies, which is done during Manifesta. The first one was done by Rem Koolhaas in Palermo, by OMA in Rem Koolhaas in Palermo. The second one was done by Vinimas, by MVRDV in Marseille. And we did a third one in Pristina last year. And what we did in Pristina was really everything based on what you say, on the feedback from citizens. So we are doing very small interventions and then measure the feedback. And based on the feedback, we would use that in order to go to a more permanent intervention, to change the intervention. So it was all based on feedback loops. So we like to do it in all the projects. So I could tell you a bit more about, how we've been looking at engagement in some of the things I showed you today. But if you look at Pristina, that was kind of most bringing engagement to the forefront is the main way to design. And there's a few articles we have done on about this on Pristina. So anyway, that's really about how we can blend better the natural and artificial, these kind of two words, by using feedback loops.
Thank you, Professor. So we have another question from Andre Brown. Do you think this kind of solution is possible in poorer and far more densely populated countries like India and Pakistan?
Now, thank you for the question, Andrea. I'm not sure what you mean, this kind of solution, because we've seen very different things. Some of them are, again, it's not an issue of scale, it's not an issue of complexity. Maybe what you're hinting at is, here some solutions seem to have a kind of more high-tech approach. And you're right, some of the projects I showed today have more an high-tech approach. But let's not forget a couple of things. You can do the same thing also, the same approach. Again, the important thing is feedback loops, which is the key principle about nature. As I say, working in Kosovo has taught us that you can do a lot of things also with matchless technology in Kosovo or in Rio de Janeiro, in other countries. So somehow technology is not the issue, even if, yes, there was a kind of slightly high-tech edge in what I showed. And the other thing to remember, so if you were referring to technology, I think, again, you can use a spectrum of solutions that don't need to be necessarily, they can be also very low-tech. And if you're referring more about the cost, well, let's not forget that every technology has an adoption curve that starts always. Everything new starts with a high price tag, but then goes down over time very quickly. Think about smartphones. We're now all around the planet. You've got places where people don't have running waters, but they have smartphones, and they're connected to the world and everybody else, which is quite incredible. But when they started, it was not that long ago, when they started developing fast 20-25 years ago, then they were super expensive at the beginning. In the 90s, a smartphone was something that was only the very rich, only few people could afford. And see how fast it has transformed. So every technology at the beginning, by definition, is adopted by an elite. But if you plan it right, if you plan again with feedback loops, the whole development, they can then change everybody's life.
Professor, thank you again. Andre Brown also said that, yes, I was referring to both technological investment and cost. We have two other questions, and we have a few minutes because the parallel sessions will start at 11 a.m. I am telling you the first one. Selin Oktan asked that technology means energy consumption, but for green energy, we also need technology. What do you think about this confliction? She asked.
Yeah, and again, I like this thinking, and yes, technology sometimes means energy consumption, sometimes means very stupid energy consumption. So if you have any Bitcoin, please don't do it. That's the most stupid thing you can do for the planet. To buy something that's based on wasting energy. Bitcoin means you're wasting energy for nothing. For allowing criminals to transfer money. So that's if you have any bit of an environmental and moral soul, just don't buy any of the kind of crap cryptocurrencies. So that's really technology means waste energy consumption. Now, conversely, yes, if you put a computer in a building, that uses a bit of energy, but if that computer allows you to run the building 10% more efficiently, well, you pay back your energy you're investing probably 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. You might put in a whole year 1 kilowatt, and you might get back 10 megawatt if it's a big building and so on. So I think that's where it makes sense to invest. For instance, in the Agnelli Foundation I mentioned, there's a few sensors, there's a computer controlling the building, but the impact you can have on the energy consumption is many order of magnitude more than what you will invest. So yes, very important point. Always need to make sure we don't waste energy in a silly way on technology, as I mentioned before, especially cryptos and so that, again, that word is certainly the last thing you want to do if you got an environmental conscience. But I think it's okay to put a few sensors, a few computers, if what you're getting is more. Again, is more than what you are getting back is more than what you're getting in. And if you play it right, you can get really 3 times more. So somehow that almost is negligible versus the gain you have.
Thank you, Professor. Another question from Artu Arpek. Firstly, thank you very much for a captivating and informative presentation. Recently, I read one of your articles where you analyze the streets of Boston with visual AI. To keep it short, what do you think about the possible visual AI applications in urbanism? How can we utilize them in our professions to enhance our creativity? Do you find it possibly threatening for our profession?
Yeah, so AI is changing many things now. Thanks for mentioning this. Visual AI is, we started calling it recently more like urban visual intelligence. And so what it is that just in a nutshell, for people who might be less familiar, just to summarize it, is over the past few years, thanks to deep learning, we're now able to understand, segment, analyze large amount of images, among other things. And so it was difficult just maybe 10 years ago to take an image and count the number of people and analyze it, look at this and that on the image. Now it's becoming very, very easy, and you can do it on a massive scale. And so we've been, over the past few years, we've been one of the main groups globally to look at this in cities. You can use a lot of images. Either you can download them from Google Street View or alternative systems. You can collect them yourself, and then you analyze the images. You can tell a lot of things about the city. So we've been in some papers. You find all the scientific papers on our MIT website. We've proven that by analyzing this, you can understand. You can map the presence of green. You can look at energy consumption of buildings. You can predict the risk of buildings for earthquakes. I think that's something we unfortunately, earthquakes, as you very well know, can have devastating impacts on cities and society. So you can actually look at the buildings. Again, you train the system and then by looking at the buildings, you can try to estimate the risk, the seismic risk. We've been looking at correlations with socioeconomics. In a recent paper in PNAS, the procedure in the National Academy of Sciences, came out like a month and a half ago, and many other things. So basically, by looking at the city, you can tell a lot of things. And by the way, this is nothing new. This goes back to the work of Camillo Sitte at the end of the 19th century, goes back to the work of Kevin Lynch, William White, Alan Jacobs in the middle of the 20th century. Just today, you can do it on a massive scale by using AI. So very exciting, and that's a way to understand the city. The second part of your question, is this a threat to the profession? I don't think this is a threat. When you looking at this type of AI, this is just more understanding, gives a better understanding, so then design is for us. But certainly other types of AI, especially when you look at generative AI applied to whatever, to plans and so on, well, that can be a threat. Because already today, if you, already today, I believe that the first discipline to kind of disappear in the traditional form is engineering. I'm traditionally a structural engineer. Engineering will remain for doing beautiful structures that have never been thought about before. But traditional engineering, which is about making sure that the building stands, will be commoditized. You press a button on your BIM, and you know the size of the column, the amount of rebar and concrete you need, and so on. So or whatever, or steel or wood and so on. So I think the threat to profession comes more from other types of AI, and especially I think generative AI will show us very interesting developments. But visual AI, or again, urban visual intelligence, is more about analyzing the city and learning more so that we can design better.
Another question from Murat Tutkun. Thank you for your interesting presentation, and I really wonder about projects, but the point is that you didn't talk about the contractors of the projects, and I'm curious about the contractors and how you convinced them, especially for Helsinki model.
Yeah, well, I would say there's, as you know, the architect scene is in between a hammer and a hard place, you could say, you know, but somehow, you know, you need to mediate between the client. You got the architect with the ideas, creative ideas, you got the client who's ultimately going to pay for that, and you got a contractor. I don't know if here the way you're just using contractor, maybe you're meaning the client, but somebody contractor, then is somebody building it. So somehow you got all these all these kind of different forces, and sometimes pushing in different directions. Now, I think the problem of convincing is not really for the contractors or people building. You know, they will build usually most of the things, provided the budget that is adequate. The problem, I would say, with contractor is mostly that if something is very new, there is some risk, and unless you make provisions for the risk in the project, or, you know, for making sure that you can share some of the risk, then, you know, the cost will go up and can make it impossible. So saying with contractors, I think it's mostly an issue of cost and risk. And I think, again, there's different ways to approach that. One that works very well, usually you do something small, you test it, and then everybody's comfortable and you scale it up, a bit like in venture capital. For the client, yes, usually sometimes clients are, again, there's an issue of risk and they are more difficult to convince. But again, in the case as well, I would say that this VC approach, venture capital approach, by iterations and trying things and, you know, doing, you know, the small mock-up, the bigger mock-up, and the full project usually works quite well.
Thank you, Professor. This is our last question from Gökçe Türkoğlu. How do you do network development for projects? How do these city labs that you have established in many different cities work? What kind of infrastructure is required to establish a city lab in a city, as human resources and technical infrastructure? Yeah,
this relates not to the work we're doing. The work we're doing in our design office is in 3 cities, but, you know, it works in a more traditional way as design office. The work we're doing in a Senseable City lab at MIT, you know, we started, now we're about to be 20-year-old at MIT. And when we started, we were only on the MIT campus. And then we started opening first the lab in Singapore. And then after Singapore, we opened the lab in Amsterdam. And we realized that that was actually helping a lot of the research. And the reason is that for different reasons. One reason is that if you are in a certain city, you know better some of the problems in the city. So, you know, they can inspire your research, you get better questions and so on. But also, you get the possibility, a much higher chance to implement the things you discover. So if you are just doing things in, say, Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on the main MIT campus, yes, you can do beautiful research, but then that stays as a theoretical piece of research. It's very difficult to apply, to turn it into things. So we were really amazed at the very beginning at the fact that in Singapore, our first initiative outside Boston, things were being implemented very fast. You know, remember we had visits by the government, regular visits by the government, and, you know, they would take some of the ideas and, you know, scale them up. So our papers were becoming things that would change people's life very quickly. And that's why over the past couple of years, we decided to scale up the global labs. And so I'll reply to your question in a second about what it takes. You know, we see them at the moment. You know, we don't have a perfect recipe, but now we got labs in Stockholm, in Amsterdam, in Singapore, in Dubai, in Milan, and opening hopefully Rio de Janeiro soon. Again, they cover a different geography, they cover different climates, they cover different socioeconomic conditions. So they're great because there is a multiplicity of problems that we can face. They also allow to learn in a place and move things with variation to another place. The kind of the format we're using now, to go back to your point, is that we have teams around 10 people per lab, half in Cambridge, in Boston, on the main campus, and half in inside Dubai or Amsterdam and so on, working on the same project. So that's our format at the moment. You know, we might let it evolve. In terms of technical infrastructure, there's not too much. Is the standard infrastructure we have in Boston. So somehow there's nothing specific to the place, but like in Boston, that's why we want to have a good connection with Boston and so on. We have, a bit of, ability to produce sensors, to deploy networks, to process big data. The data infrastructure is the same. We are sharing between them and so on. So that's in a nutshell how we're doing it. That's our model. So it has changed a lot over the years. In the past couple of years, we are doing this, and it seems to be doing well. Now, ask me again in a couple of years, and I'll tell you what we've learned, because in the same way, as I was saying, we want cities to evolve with feedback loops. Well, that's the same thing we should do ourselves in the way we do things. Always question results, monitor what works, what doesn't, and evolve ourselves.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was our last question. And thank you again for your speech. And thank you for the questions too. It was so inspiring and fruitful, again saying. So now we will take a break for the parallel sessions. They will start at 11 a.m. Hope to see you all there and wish you all an interesting and informative day with lots of networking within these 3 days. Professor, thank you again. It was so glad for us to welcoming you here.
Thank you very much. And I hope next time, I know this time logistics didn't work and we saved a bit of CO2 for my travel, but next time I hope to see you in person there.
We really hope that too. Thank you so much.